I woke up as the fake heiress in a novel I had read, and within a day I knew the comments were quoting a book that did not match mine. I read a fan translation. They were reading the official one. One page of it had been reprinted. The comments were quoting a book I had not read, and that is the entire story, and it took me 11 weeks to understand that it was the entire story rather than an irritation. They arrived when I did, on the morning of Chapter 9, hanging in the air over a composing stone in a printing works in Ayrshire, in pale letters nobody else could see, and they were doing what they always do, which is spoiling and gloating and being certain. Here it comes. Chapter 9. Kilmaurs. The nursing home. Poor Cordelia. And I stood there with my hand on a stone that has been in that room since 1841, and I thought, in the flat professional way you think when a comma is wrong. No, it wasn't. It was a maternity unit in Ayr. I had read that chapter on a Tuesday in March on my phone in a hospital car park, waiting for my mother's appointment to finish, and it was a maternity unit in Ayr in 1998, and I remember it because the translator had rendered the ward name oddly, and I had gone back and read the sentence twice, which is what 22 years of my life had trained me to do. My name is Roz Feather. I am 39, and I read proofs for a legal publisher, which means I have spent my entire working life being the person who notices that page 411 says Schedule 3, and page 9 says Schedule 3, and that somewhere between them a solicitor is going to lose a case. I read the novel because a woman at work would not stop going on about it. It is called The Old Inheritance, and it is about a printing family in Ayrshire and a girl called Tansy who is discovered at 22 not to be theirs, and it is not badly written, and in Chapter 9 the family gets the result, and by the end of Chapter 9 Tansy is on a bus. I read it in a pirated fan translation that a 15-year-old in Malaysia had put up in 9 installments, because that is how I read everything, because the official English edition is £19, and the commenters were reading the official one. And on the very first morning, before I had worked out how to put a coat on in that body, they told me a fact about the world I was standing in that was not the fact I had. I read proofs for 22 years. I want to explain what that actually gives you, because it is not intelligence and it is not memory, and it is worth more than either in a situation like this. It is a habit of holding two texts against each other without needing to understand a word of them. A proofreader does not read for sense. You read for difference. You put the setting against the copy, and your eye goes to the place they diverge, and after about 11 years it stops being a skill and becomes a nuisance, and you find yourself unable to look at a menu. 4 things from the 22 years, so you know what kind of woman was standing at that stone. In 2011, I stopped a practitioner text, going out with a limitation period given as 6 years in the body and 3 in the table, and the editor argued with me for 2 days and then went white, and I have never once been thanked for it and did not expect to be, and that is the whole profession in one anecdote. I have read the same 1,100-page tax annual every spring since 2009, and I can tell you which paragraph moved in which year. I cannot spell the word liaise, and have looked it up perhaps 400 times. And in 2019 I was made redundant and rehired 11 weeks later on 19% less to do the same work, and I took it because I was 33 and my mother was ill, and there is no union in publishing worth the name, and I have carried that around ever since as evidence that I am a person things get done to. I mention it because it is relevant to what I did with a leaf in a loft, and because a woman who has spent 22 years finding other people's mistakes and being paid less for it every year is a specific kind of dangerous when she is finally handed a discrepancy that belongs to her. And the thing about a discrepancy, the thing they teach you in the first fortnight, is that a discrepancy is never interesting in itself. It is a pointer. It says, somebody has been here. Somebody has made a change and not carried it through, and the question is never, what does the change mean? The question is, who made it and when, and what were they doing at the time? So I did not spend 11 weeks wondering what the comments meant. I spent 11 weeks working out where the two texts parted, and there was exactly one place, one paragraph in one chapter. Everywhere else, and I tested this for weeks by baiting them, by saying things out loud in empty rooms to see what they quoted back. The two versions are word for word the same book, Kilmaurs and Eyre, a nursing home and a maternity unit, the 9th of February and the 22nd of January. "Which edition are you reading?" one of them wrote, about 6 weeks in reply to nothing, because they cannot hear me and never could, and that is the closest any of them ever came to it, and whoever wrote it moved on to complaining about the pacing. A cancel is a leaf that has been replaced. This is the technical heart of it, and it takes 90 seconds and then it stops being technical. When a book has been printed and bound and something in it turns out to be wrong, badly enough to matter and cheaply enough to fix, you do not pulp the edition. You print the corrected page on a single leaf, and you slit out the original leaf from every copy, close to the spine, leaving a stub, and you paste the new one onto that stub. The killed page is the cancelandum, and the new one is the cancellens, and the practice is 200 years old, and it is entirely ordinary, and every antiquarian bookseller in Britain can spot one at a glance, because the stub is visible if you open the book flat and look down into the gutter. And the first edition of the Old Inheritance has a cancel at signature C. I found it by opening the copy in the front office of a printing works and looking down into the gutter, which took 4 seconds, and which anybody who has ever worked with books would have done in the first week if anybody who has ever worked with books had had a reason to. Auld and Sons printed that novel. That is not a coincidence, and it is not irony. It is just how a small country works. A novel set in an Ayrshire printing family, written by a woman from Kilmarnock, was printed by the only heritage press within 40 miles, because the publisher wanted letterpress on the title page for the look of the thing. 2,200 copies in the March. And in the July, 4 months after publication, one leaf of it was killed and reprinted, in the same works, on the same machine, and every copy in the warehouse was recalled and recancelled by hand by 2 women in the bindery over 9 days. Nobody hides a cancel. That is the thing I keep coming back to. A cancel is a normal, honorable, expensive piece of bookmaking, and it is done in the open, and the reason it works as concealment is that it removes the original page from the world so completely that nobody ever thinks to ask what was on it, and within a year the corrected text is the text, and it is the text in every library, and every database, and every reprint, and every official translation. And the only version that still carries the killed page is the one somebody typed out from a first printing before the recall, which is exactly what a 15-year-old in Malaysia did in the April. I should say what the works is, because it is not a museum, and everybody assumes it is. Auld and Sons employs 19 people. It does short-run letterpress and case binding, and a great deal of unglamorous commercial work that keeps the lights on, orders of service, and menus, and certificates, and the county's ballot papers, and the heritage machines earn their keep by being photographed. The composing room has 40 tons of type in it, and 3 people alive who can set it. And Tansy Auld, whose body I am in, had worked there since she was 17, in the bindery doing casework, and was good at it, and had never been near the office. And that is the thing the novel gets right, and the commenters never noticed. She was not a princess in a big house. She was a girl who sewed sections in the back of her own family's factory for 6 years, while her uncle sat in the front office and decided what she was. There is a photograph on the stairs of the whole works in 1994, and another of the whole works in 2019. And Isla Auld is in the front of both, and Tansy is at the back of the second one, behind a stitching machine, half out of frame. Nobody put her there. She stood there. Cordelia Bray arrived on the Tuesday. She is 22 as well, and she came with a rucksack and a photograph and a birth record, and she is the reason the last part of this is bearable, and I want to say straight away that Cordelia has never done a dishonest thing, and that everything she said was true. She stood in the yard between the machine room and the bindery, with the whole works watching from the doorways, and she said, "I don't want anything. I wanted to see where I'm from." And Isla Auld, who is my mother in this life, and who is not my mother, went down the steps and put both arms round her, and stayed there, and 400,000 people cried. And I stood by the guillotine and thought, that woman has just embraced a stranger on the strength of a document, and I am the only person in this yard who knows that document has a page missing. Cordelia is home. I have waited 9 chapters, Tansy just standing there like a stone, and they were not wrong about me standing there like a stone. What I did over the next 4 days is nothing anybody would put in a novel. I asked Cordelia 3 questions, in the kitchen, with her mother's photograph on the table between us, and I asked them in the order you would ask them if you were checking a citation. Where were you born? She said Kilmaurs, the nursing home. It is on my record. When? The 9th of February, 1998. And who told you? And she said, and this is the sentence the whole thing turns on. It was in the book. My aunt read the book, and she rang me. The comments had never been spoiling the plot to me. They had been quoting the instrument. A woman in Kilmarnock wrote a novel that named a place and a date, and a girl in Dumfries read it in an official edition and recognized her own life in it and got on a train. And the place and the date she recognized were the ones that had been printed in the July, 4 months after publication, to replace the ones that were there in the March. Every job that costs money gets a docket. That is the whole of it, and it is the least romantic sentence in this account. A cancel is not free. You are paying for a plate correction, a make-ready, a short run on a single leaf, 2 women in the bindery for 9 days, and a carriage charge to recall stock from a warehouse in Bellshill. And in a works that has been keeping books since 1826, all of that goes on a job docket with a number, and the dockets go in the ledger, and the ledgers go in the loft. It took me 1 afternoon. Docket 41108, dated the 11th of July, client the publisher, description cancel leaf sig c, 1,980 leaves, and against it, in the margin, in a hand I have seen on 40 years of paperwork in that building, the note, per H.A., charge to house, charge to house. The publisher did not pay for it. The old press absorbed the cost of correcting the publisher's book, £4,100 of it, on the instruction of Hume Auld, who is the company secretary, who is Isla's brother-in-law, who has been the quiet man at the end of every table in that family since 1994, and who has never in his life signed anything that mattered. And then I did the part that took 9 days and a head torch, which is the bindery loft. Binders keep waste, not out of sentiment, out of parsimony. Offcuts and spoils and killed leaves get used as packing between boards, as press papers, as scrap for tying bundles, and the loft above the bindery at Auld & Sons has 2 centuries of it in tea chests, and it has never been sorted because sorting it has never been worth anybody's time. I found the killed leaves in the 4th chest, 41 of them, used as interleaving in a bundle of unbound sheets from a parish magazine, face down, and I sat on the floor of that loft under a skylight with a head torch and read a page of a novel that does not exist in any library in the world. It says a maternity unit in air. It says the 22nd of January. And it says one more thing that the fan translation did not carry, because the boy in Malaysia had skipped a line as boys do, and which I had therefore never read. It names a night sister on the ward by name, and the name is Hume Auld's sister. They came for the loft in the May, and it was done kindly, and it very nearly worked. A memo went round about the bicentenary and the insurance survey, and item 4 said the bindery loft was to be cleared before the open day because the surveyor had flagged the floor loading, which was true and which I checked, and which a surveyor genuinely had said. The clearance was scheduled for the 14th of June. The contractor was a skip firm, and the instruction was to remove all non-current stock, and it went out over the works manager's name and had been drafted, as everything in that building is drafted, by the company secretary. 200 years of binder's waste into 11 skips in 1 week, entirely lawfully, for a completely genuine reason, 3 months after a woman started going up there with a head torch. I did not object. That is the only clever thing I did in 11 weeks, and it took me 2 days to work out. If I had objected, I would have been a woman objecting, and the loft would have gone anyway on a surveyor's report, and I would have been the person who made a fuss about rubbish. What I did instead was write 1 email to the works manager, copied to nobody, saying that before the clearance I would like to sort the loft for anything of bibliographical interest, that I would do it in my own time, and that I would have it done by the 12th. And he said yes in 9 minutes, because it saved him a job. I had 26 days, and I used all of them, and the tea chests went into 11 skips on the 14th of June exactly as instructed, and by then the 41 leaves were in a box file in the boot of a Vauxhall Corsa in a car park in Prestwick. Hume Auld watched that clearance from the yard, and I have thought many times about what he believed he was watching. I did not go to the family with it. I want to be exact about why, because it is the only piece of judgment in this story that I am proud of, and it is not moral, it is procedural. If I had put a leaf on the kitchen table, the leaf becomes a claim, and a claim made by the fake heiress against the man who is about to inherit is a claim with a motive stapled to it. And Hume Auld would have said the obvious true thing, which is that a novel is fiction, and that a novelist may change a detail for any reason on earth, and he would have been right, and everybody in that room would have been relieved to hear it. A cancelled leaf proves that a page was changed. It does not prove why. What I needed was for somebody who is not me to want to know why, and there is exactly 1 category of person who cannot look away from a cancel, and it is not a family, and it is not a newspaper, it is bibliographers. Isla did the other thing to me in the June, and it is the only conversation from either of my lives that I have not been able to put down. She came into the bindery at the end of a shift and sat on the stool by the nipping press, which she has not done since I was 17, and she said, "You've been up in that loft," and I said I had. And she said, "Your gran sewed in this room for 31 years, and she never once went up there, because there's nothing up there, and I want you to tell me what you think you're doing." And I said I was sorting waste for the open day. And Isla Auld looked at me for a long moment, and then said the thing that was aimed, and it was aimed with the precision of a woman who has had 22 years to find the soft place. She said, "You're not curious, Tansy. You've never been curious in your life. You're wanting a reason, and I'll tell you now, there isn't one that makes you the daughter, and her not, so leave it." And I sat on a stitching stool in my own family's bindery and could not answer her, because she was right about the first part and wrong about the second, in a way I could not explain without producing a leaf, and because she believed I had spent 3 months up there hunting for a document that would restore me, that had honestly never once crossed my mind. I did not want to be the daughter. I have never wanted to be the daughter. I wanted to know which of 2 sentences was the true one, and there is no version of that I could have said out loud in that room that would not have sounded like a woman pretending she did not want what everybody could see she wanted. So I said, "All right." And she went, and she thought she had won, and for about 9 days so did I. So I did the boring thing. In the June I wrote to the National Library, to the Rare Books Department, as an employee of the press that printed the book, and reported the existence of surviving Cancellanda from a modern first edition, which is a thing they want to know about, and which they had no reason whatsoever to doubt, and offered them a leaf for the collection. And in the July, a woman called Dr. Marion Keel came out to look at the loft, and stayed 4 hours, and went back with 3 leaves and a photograph of the Docket, and in the August she wrote a note about it for a bibliographical journal that 900 people read, and one of the 900 was the novel's own editor. Thank you for listening to Channel Crystal Novel. The bicentenary open day was the 9th of September. 200 years of Auld and Sons, and the works opens its doors, and it is the biggest thing that happens in that town. About 1,100 people come through across the day. The machine room runs. The bindery does demonstrations. There are school parties in the morning, and the provost at 2. And everything in the building that is worth looking at goes into cases in the old warehouse with typed cards next to it. I did not make a speech. I have never made a speech in either of my lives. What I did was put an exhibit in a case, which I was entitled to do, because I had been doing the exhibits since the June, because I am the one who reads things, and everybody in that building had spent a year being quietly glad that somebody would. Case 11. On the left, the published first edition, open flat at signature C, with a card that says First Edition, March, cancel at C4, and an arrow drawn on the card pointing into the gutter at the stub. On the right, the killed leaf from the bindery loft in a mount with a card that says the original C4, recovered from binder's waste, canceled July. And between them, in the middle of the case, a photograph of Docket 41108 with its date and its description and its £4,100 and its 5 words in the margin. Per HA, charge to house. 3 objects, no adjectives, no accusation, and a card on each. 1,100 people went past that case. Most of them looked at the machine room instead, which is fair, because the machine room is magnificent. But about 90 of them stopped and read both pages, and then read them again, and I watched a retired English teacher take her glasses off and put them back on twice. And at about 3:20, Dr. Marion Keel, who had come for the day and who I had told nothing at all, stood in front of Case 11, with the provost beside her, and said, at the volume of a woman who lectures, "This is a suppressed text, and the interesting question is who paid to suppress it." And Hume Auld, who was 11 feet away doing the thing he does, which is standing near the important person with his hands behind his back, said, it was a factual correction requested by the publisher. And Marion Keel said, then why is it charged to your house account? Hume Auld did the correct thing first, which was to be reasonable in front of a provost. He said that the leaf was a working document, that binder's waste is not a record, and that the house had absorbed the cost as a goodwill gesture to a client, which is a thing this firm has done 100 times. And Marion Keel said that she had no view on goodwill and a considerable view on provenance, and asked whether the house had absorbed the cost of any other client's cancel in the last 20 years. He said he would have to check. She said she had already checked, because the dockets are in the ledger, and the ledger had been on a table in that warehouse since 10 o'clock that morning, and the answer was no. Fergus Auld said, from somewhere behind me, who put the ledger out? Which is the loud one asking the only question that does not matter, and I did not answer him, and 1,100 people were in that building, and about 40 of them were now standing around Case 11, and that was all of it. That was the entire confrontation, and it lasted about 9 seconds, and it was conducted by a woman in her 60s who had no interest in that family whatsoever, and who simply could not let a bibliographical question go. And I had spent 3 months arranging for her to be standing in front of that case, and I did not say one word during it. The bibliographical note did more than I intended, which is the thing about handing a fact to people whose entire discipline is facts. 2 university libraries went and checked their copies and found stubs. A dealer in Edinburgh who had 4 first printings put a description on his site with the word cancellandum in it, and sold all 4 inside a fortnight to collectors who wanted a suppressed leaf, and one of those collectors gave his to the National Library, which now has 4. The publisher's own archive was asked for the correspondence, politely twice, and refused, politely twice, and then produced it in the civil case anyway. And the trade press ran 900 words in the autumn under a headline about a modern cancel, which is the most boring headline in Britain, and which was read by exactly the people who could not let it alone. The second edition was withdrawn in the spring. The publisher pulled it once the correspondence came out, which it did in the discovery in the civil case, and the correspondence is 4 emails long, and it is the most depressing thing I have ever read. The author was asked in the June, 4 months after publication, to accept a correction to Chapter 9 on the grounds that the original detail was factually inaccurate and potentially defamatory of a named institution, and she was offered a sum described as a reissue fee, and she took it, and she wrote back a 2-line email that says, "Of course, whatever is easiest," and I have thought about those 5 words more than about anything Hume Auld ever did. She was 61, and she had written 4 books, and none of them had sold, and a printing house offered her £4,000 to change a hospital to a nursing home in a novel nobody had noticed yet, and she said, "Whatever is easiest." She has not published since. She wrote to me in the 2nd year a real letter on paper, and it is a page and a half, and it does not excuse anything, and it ends with a sentence I did not expect, which is, "I did not know what the date was for," and I believe her, and I have never answered it, and I am not sure whether that is cruelty or just that I do not know what to put. Hume Auld was not charged with anything, because paying a novelist to alter a novel is not an offense, and neither is paying for a cancel. What ended him is smaller and slower. The leaf gave Cordelia Bray a date and a place, and a date and a place gave a solicitor in Ayr a records request, and the maternity unit's admission book for the 22nd of January 1998 exists, and it has 2 births on it, and it has the Night Sister's name on it, and the Night Sister is Hume Auld's sister, and she is 67, and she talked in the end for about 4 hours in her own kitchen, and what she said is in a statement, and it is not mine to summarize beyond this. Nobody swapped anybody. Cordelia Bray was born to Isla Auld on the 22nd of January 1998 and was given away privately, informally in a car park to a family in Dumfries by arrangement, because Isla was 19 and unmarried, and the Aulds are what they are. And Tansy was born 11 months later, and is Isla's as well. And there was never a swap, and never a mistake, and never a hospital error. There was a decision. So the novel was not fiction with one detail wrong. The novel was a fairly accurate account with one detail changed, and the detail was changed because the true one led to a car park. There is a thing I have to put in, because leaving it out would make me better than I am. When the Night Sister's statement came through in the November, and I read the words about the car park, my first feeling was not for Cordelia, and it was not for Isla. It was relief, and the relief was that I had been right about a sentence. 22 years of being the woman who notices, of being argued with for 2 days, and then vindicated and not thanked, and a girl's whole life came apart in a solicitor's letter, and what I felt first, for about 4 seconds, was the small, clean satisfaction of a discrepancy resolved. I have not told anybody that until now. Cordelia found out what happened to her from a document I caused to exist, and she has thanked me for it twice, and both times I have wanted to leave the room. I am still Tansy. I still work in that building, and I have been the works archivist for 2 years, which is a job I invented in a memo, and which the board created because Marion Keel wrote them a letter suggesting it, and I spend 3 days a week in a loft with 200 years of binder's waste in tea chests, and I am about a fifth of the way through it, and I will not finish it before I am 60. Isla and I speak. That is the correct word, and it is the only one I will use. She has never explained herself to me, and I have never asked, because I watched a woman with her arms round a stranger in a yard in front of the whole works, and I know exactly what that was now, and there is a version of me that goes at her about it, and she is not a version I can afford to be, because Cordelia comes on Sundays. Cordelia comes on Sundays. She is 24 now, and she is at the university at Glasgow doing history, and she is better in that loft than I am, and she has a theory about the 1917 ledgers that is almost certainly right, and that I have been fighting for a year out of pure vanity. She calls Isla by her first name, always, deliberately, and Isla lets her, and I think that is the fairest arrangement anybody in this family has ever come to. Fergus Auld went to Perth. Hume retired and is on the bowling green most days, and we do not speak, and the town has arranged itself around that without anybody discussing it, which is what small towns are actually for. And the comments went, over about a year, the way a crowd leaves a room, and the last one I remember came during the withdrawal, and whoever wrote it had gone and found a first printing on a second-hand site and paid £11 for it and opened it flat, and it said only, "There is a stub in mine." Case 11 is still up. It is not part of the tour, and it is at the back of the warehouse next to the fire door, and about once a month somebody stops in front of it, and the card on the right-hand page has not been changed since the 9th of September, and it says what it said then, which is the original C4, recovered from binder's waste, cancelled July. It does not say who by. It does not need to. The whole point of a cancel, the thing that made it such a good place to hide a thing, is that everybody in the trade knows a killed page cannot be killed properly, because binders keep waste, because paper is expensive, because in a building like that nothing has ever once been thrown away, and if you are going to hide a sentence you should not hide it in a printing works. So here is what I want to know from you, since you have been reading over my shoulder the whole way, and I now know precisely what that is like. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next.